cover some of the skill sets we feel are necessary in our positions and roles, and then open it up to Q&A. So I'll just start off, it's okay with Corey. I'm originally from here in Minnesota, born and raised, grew up in a city called Orono, just west of Minneapolis here. After that, I was lucky enough to have receive an athletic scholarship to go play football at North Dakota State. My lasting claim to fame at this point in time, people know Carson Wentz or heard of him. If you pull up the record book right now, you can see my name in a couple items, not too many, but a couple of them on ahead of it. So I'll leave it at that. Graduated with a business administration degree, completed my internship up in Fargo with Wells Fargo. Learned a lot, got to go through a bunch of different tasks and operations in the departments. Wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do coming out of college, moved back home, but was pretty confident the last thing I wanted to get into was banking and finance. So with that, I took my first position working with BNC National Bank. So as an analyst in the investment and ALM side of it, so that was more of like data aggregation, integration, doing core deposit study, analysis, data, risk analysis, things like that. Next, I moved into a role staying within BNC National Bank as a credit analyst, working on the commercial real estate side. I entered that timing impeccable 2008, at the beginning of 2008, right at the beginning of the recession. Got to deal with a lot of loan workouts, a lot of poor negotiations, and just kind of a dogfight through the whole process. That was very educational, but it did help me as I moved on to the asset liability management side. Got to take away a lot of the knowledge of an understanding about how we were underwriting credit, the risks that we pose, credit loss, those types of scenarios, and not only some of the workout scenarios that we're working with dealing with some of those structures. And then the last two bullet points of my career kind of tie together. Technically, my current role and title is investment officer, but I would also hatch that with the asset liability manager, just because it's a little bit better of a flow, rather than having a tagline on my card that says that stretches two lengths. We're just going to go with investment officer as my current title technically. So, and in that facet right now, I'm still asset liability management, but I also manage wealth management client funds as well too. So,
yeah. So my name is Corey Krebs. I work for U.S. Bank Corp, and I graduated from St. Thomas in 2003 with a concentration in finance. In terms of my work history, it's all been with U.S. Bank. Actually, what's not on this slide is I was a teller at a U.S. Bank branch during college, and I, like Greg, I had no intention of being a banker, so it was a job at that point. But that was a time when actually two large banks were coming together, and the U.S. Bank actually had sold itself to First Star. I worked at the First Star branch. U.S. Bank was purchased by First Star, but they brought the headquarters here. As I got to more engage in the culture, I thought that this is a really good place to be, and I've been here ever since. Upon graduating from college, I started my career in the corporate side, in our corporate treasury division. I work on a desk called, we call it internally as the bank support desk. It's really a team of analysts that help our lenders and help them make their loans and price their loans and get their cost of funds. So I spent about a year and a half there. After that, I moved into the business line analyst role. I support our corporate bank. That's your traditional FP&A, financial planning and analysis role, where you're doing budgets and all that good stuff. After about a year of that, there was an opportunity to come back to the corporate treasury. It was a time around, there was a lot of new regulations being put in place for new banks. So we were embarking on a journey to get the bank stood up to handle these new capital rules. And we were really putting in place an economic capital program that hadn't existed until then. That's kind of springboarded my career where I'm at today, because as a part of our economic capital program, I was mostly responsible for getting our pricing models developed, figuring out how to calculate, how much equity do you need to hold for various exposures, and therefore, what is the return on equity. And that led to what I do today, which is mainly that same role, but just maybe in a little larger capacity. I'm working more across the bank in terms of pricing and profitability, working with business lines on pricing strategy and serving as sort of treasury's face to a lot of the business lines. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's where we sit in these roles is actually it's unique, and you get a good perspective of the bank. So it's I've enjoyed my time in Treasury, and in terms of outside of work, I try to do some volunteer work, take advantage of the volunteer opportunities that come to me from U.S. Bank, and we get a couple days off to volunteer, so I think that's very important. Then I also feel strongly about being a mentor, so I'm leading our business line mentoring, our internship program. So I get to be a mentor in that capacity and really help people feel their way through their career. So that's something I'm very passionate about as well.
Just give you a snapshot, like you said earlier, about kind of how we can do the contrast and compare between our two institutions. BNC National Bank, our primary presence banking-wise is going to be in Western North Dakota, Bismarck area is where we were founded. So we're going to have most of our branch operations in there. We also have offices here in Golden Valley. That's where the majority of our C-suite operations is. Lending, deposit side, we don't have much of a presence, but we do operationally exist here too. And then down in Glendale, Arizona, is another banking operation we have. Aside from that, we also have a very large mortgage presence, at least for our size of an institution. We originated around $1 billion worth of mortgage originations in the last year. So that's based out of Overland Park, Kansas. So our primary focus, our bank was founded roughly 25 plus years ago by a couple of individuals that had a CPA firm that they ran. Through their knowledge, through their dealings with businesses in the local Bismarck area, they came to this understanding and belief that really kind of that small mid-market niche was really being underserved. So they bought a bank and with the goal of serving those type of businesses, and that's kind of continuing on from there. That's really kind of our target market and area demographics. So retail mortgage banking presence, obviously traditional base, and then the wealth management side, retirement planning, trust services, accounting, payroll, and those type of things. So,
yeah, so U.S. Bank, as Greg mentioned, a bunch of different institutions in terms of geographic size and our geographic scale and size. We're about $460 billion in assets. We operated primarily 25 states in our retail franchise footprint. We're actually a global provider of payment services and corporate trust services. So we got 74,000 employees across the globe. We operate primarily in 4 segments: your traditional, your consumer small business space, corporate and commercial. That's going to be your middle market and larger companies. And then we have I mentioned our payment services businesses. So that's credit cards, corporate payments, merchant processing type stuff. Working with all facets of that stream, and then wealth management, security services, or should be investment services, but that's your private wealth management and corporate trust and institutional trust and custody type businesses. So
now we'll kind of delve into some of the daily and typical routine responsibilities that we have, given our current roles. I think from here we could probably go back and forth a little bit. Our funds transfer pricing, basically, for those of you who are not involved in the day-to-day operation, basically, it's an attempt by an institution to model the net benefit of individual transactions. So you're talking about deposits, and you're talking about loans and things like that. You're trying to price out the profitability on a net basis from the context of alternative funding sources opportunities. So for us, my role and my department's role as it relates to funds transfer pricing is we've come up with a methodology that we've applied across our institutions and balance sheets. We are an educational resource, provide the data and analytics behind how those models operate, and then also, like I talked about, we're more of an educational resource, so we've got those people on the front line that are dealing with how to price out a transaction and determine the viability and the profitability of that transaction, kind of giving the background about why certain things might price out a certain way versus, they may say this is a solid relationship. Well, they have to make that determination that how valuable that relationship is, how much they're willing to give up on the profitability of the individual transaction base. We might try to steer them more towards obviously pricing at a greater spread on one side, and why that actually is the case, and why certain things just aren't worth bidding.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's very similar to U.S. Bank. I mean, we're constantly trying to make sure that we've got the right value on our liabilities and our funding sources and the right costs associated with our loan. Because if you think about it from our perspective, we're kind of the bank within a bank, and we're trying to manage the flow of funds, right? So you've got some divisions out there that are out there and gathering deposits. You've got other divisions in the bank that don't have deposits, but they're making loans. Our job is to match those together and make sure that the depositors are getting paid fairly for the value of the funding they're bringing to the bank, and then we're also making sure that we charge the lending units fairly for the funds that they're using for the bank. And the goal of our funds transfer pricing system is really to sort of be agnostic to anything but just where the market is, and treating a loan or a deposit based on the merits of its value, right? So it's hard to do that equitably, except for to look at it sort of on the margin. Where would I be able to go and source funds today if I had to go out and raise them versus getting the deposit, and that's how you would put the value on it. Or if I had to go fund this loan in the market, how much would it cost me? And that's one way to keep the value pure and sort of just stay tuned to the risks and the characteristics of that instrument that you're trying to put a value on. So a lot goes into that, and spend probably all day talking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, another, I guess, overall difference in contrast between the two of us. I mean, he's got a department that kind of specializes in that role and kind of aids in the actual task of pricing out those transactions, whereas we're just kind of a backdoor source. You know, if you have questions about this stuff, we'll post the curves online through our internet process. Managers can go out there and actually view what those curves look like, so that concept going into pricing out a relationship. But that's pretty much at that point we're hands off. We don't actually get involved with the actual pricing of individual transactions. We've got far more other things to do versus Corey, where he's got a team that they kind of specialize in that task.
And that's primarily what my team. I got a team underneath me that does exactly that. We work individually with each lender to lock their rate in and figure out what that cost of funds is. So it takes, in the size of the bank, it takes people dedicated to that, and then also answering a lot of the questions.
On the liquidity side, it's two-faceted from our side. My department is responsible for generating any sort of internal liquidity that we necessarily need, taking down long-term funding, short-term, whatever the borrowing capacity may be, getting changes in our balance sheet. Also, the overall measurement of that as it relates to the size of our institution here, we're not subject to the liquidity coverage ratio. Although I would say the way we choose to manage our liquidity and measure our liquidity on a monthly and a measurement tool basis is very similar. We approach it on a collateral basis, so we use our, like I saw like the slide previous when I talked about BNC National Bank size, we're roughly under $1 billion. Our current investment portfolio is roughly around $400 million of that. So we kind of approach that from that's a collateral basis that we can use for pledging purposes and provide liquidity for our institution. So we kind of value similar like LCR, that's basically how similar to the concept of how they apply it. We just do it on a little bit of a smaller scale. And we kind of measure our basic surplus for that, and that's our tool that we use over a 30-day horizon. So it's basically taking those, not only cash, giving ourselves better cash, but those pledging collateral capacities that we have through our investment portfolio, back out any sort of potential risks that we have on the short-term volatile liabilities, funding as it relates to lines of credit, things like that, kind of back that out. And then we end up with a net dollar basic surplus, and then we compare that to our overall asset base, and then measure that as a ratio. In a situation where, subject to wherever our capital ratio levels are, in a situation where we've got tighter capital ratios, a little bit lower levels, then we're going to have a little bit more liquidity in that sort of situation. So our measurement tool, policy purpose-wise, is going to be dictated based upon our credit or capital ratios. And then from there on, we also, that's our first tier level in a sense of liquidity measurement. Secondly, we involve the capacity we have on a borrowing basis from the FHLB. So we pledge loans as collateral as well as certain investment securities. And then lastly would be our policy limit capacities as it relates to taking out broker deposits. Those three levels are tiered measurements as far as overall basic surplus and operational basis, and how we measure it.
Yeah, and I say for our larger banks, I think the liquidity component of sort of the Treasury function has become the most intensely scrutinized. So coming out of the credit crisis, if you think about what failed some of the larger banks, it wasn't necessarily a lack of capital, it was a lack of liquidity. So after the regulators kind of fixed what they perceived as a undercapitalization of the banking market by introducing a bunch of capital rules, they really came back with the liquidity side of the house. So what they forced large banks now to do is make sure that you have enough tangible liquidity on your balance sheet versus going to a contingent source, you really have to keep the liquidity on your balance sheet in the form of cash or treasury, something that you could sell if your deposits start to run off or your lines start to be drawn. And that's been probably the biggest area of focus for the past several years. And we've seen a tremendous growth in our liquidity group, just to try to deal with all the regulatory expectations. So in addition to just setting sort of minimum liquidity standards from a regulatory perspective, they're also really looking and challenging how you stress that liquidity. And are your scenarios severe enough? Do you reflect stresses that other institutions went through during the credit crisis, the ones that have failed? Really take yourself out of the position you're in, put yourself in their position. How would you manage the balance sheet and your liquidity then? That's the bar has really been set pretty high in this space. So
history's kind of proven itself as far as the banking industry goes, that liquidity and credit losses and the impact that has on capital are really the two primary drivers of both failing banks and banking institutions. So obviously liquidity is a pretty high level of line item up there. Next we move into risk management. Again, we're talking about earnings at risk with regard to net interest income simulations, as well as economic value of equity. So basically running models, internal-based models to measure our net interest income simulation over a given horizon. So we change, subject to a change in the rates over a certain period. What does a net interest income profile look given those changes in the rate situation? And then we measure that over a short-term and a long-term horizon too. Knowing that over the short term, that likely doesn't give enough turnover of your balance sheet, but it does give you enough capacity to understand the inherent risks of the existing balance sheet. Over your long term, yes, it can be a benefit to kind of see your overall profile, but you're also subject to all the assumptions that you're making within your model as well too. So there's a lot of risk involved on that side of it. The economic value of equity, that's more of a risk measurement as it's subject to an instantaneous shock of changing rates. So you're basically looking at the market value of your assets minus your liabilities net with your economic value of equity. So that's kind of the short-term horizon in the sense of that context. Those by themselves individually aren't enough to understand the risk that is existing that exists within your existing balance sheet. You kind of got to combine the two and have an understanding. Make sure that your model is kind of telling you the same thing in both profiles, and two, being able to apply and understand where those risks lie given the change in rates. We at BNC National Bank, we don't really kind of have this view of an anticipation of what rates are going to do over a certain horizon. We just want to understand what our net interest income and need profile looks if rates were to change in a certain way. That gives us, we don't have an internal economist or anything like that. Even if we did, I know when I started out in the analyst role, we used to, at our outcome meetings, we used to provide all of our board members with a slide snippet, basically, of all the Fed economists' forecasts of what interest rates are going to do over the next 12 months, 3 years, so on and so forth. And then we do a back study about what those results actually ended up showing. And pretty much every time they were off, not only on the magnitude of which rates change, but also the direction as well too. And that kind of allows us to continue to share and drive home the fact of why we need to be kind of disregarding what our internal beliefs are as far as what's going to happen with rates, and be conscious of what happens if rates go there, what our actual overall profile looks like to bear out the risks that we have with our existing balance sheet.
Yeah, I'd say our philosophy is the same. We're not trying to we're not interest rate traders. We're really trying to react to what the possible outcomes could be. So our interest rate risk management group, they're modeling all sorts of contortions of the yield curve, something north of 25, 30 scenarios, and all sorts of twists and inversions and shocks and all that good stuff. Trying to figure out where might you have vulnerability and where would you maybe need to hedge something or lay off risk or do something differently. To your point about where the economists view, I was just giving a presentation out of our business line. I was showing them the Fed dot plots for the coming years, and if you layer on where the market actually thinks the rates will be versus the voting members projections, there's a very big divergence, and there has been for a while. And to your point, the market's been more right than the voting members of the Fed. So you really can't take any of that into consideration. So you really just want to prepare yourself for what could happen over a multitude of environments, and make sure you're within your risk limits. And if there's you could have maybe some tactical tilts into your interest rate risk position, but generally speaking, you're not trying to bet the bank one way or the other on interest rates, because you'll probably end up losing. That's what causes a lot of problems in the market, is when people start making bets. So a lot of this risk management is probably critical, to everything that we do in this space.
Right. Moving on from there, forecasting. My role at BNC National Bank, actually, I run the forecast model, as it says. So forecasting earnings, I'm talking with managers, getting reports as far as expectations of balance sheet growth, reductions, deposits, loans, pricing of transactions, kind of getting that top level detail, because they're the ones talking with their lenders and having an idea of what they're seeing in the market, competition, so on and so forth. I take all that detail and kind of plug it into a spreadsheet. And it sounds a little bit more low level than it actually is. The modeling capabilities are pretty dynamic and pretty impressive. But that's kind of that role. Budgeting is kind of similar context, it's got a different scale. We're getting more into the weeds on that level. We're not so top level or high level as far as we are like on the forecast basis. Although we do, generally our best forecasting takes place following out of the budget cycle, because our managers are really getting into the weeds as it relates to GL line items on their non-interest expense pieces, what their actual true expectations are as far as holding their lenders and deposit managers to growth expectations. So those two kind of go together. Lastly, I'll lump capital planning in there too. We are not subject to CCAR, DFAST, those pieces. However, we do believe that that's one of the good things that came out of that's hyper-regulated world that we live in banking. We do believe that capital planning is a pretty beneficial tool for an institution. All banks should be doing it. We do it ourselves. We don't do it from the high level, as far as impacts on what GDP and unemployment and what curves are going to look like in certain severely adverse scenarios. We don't do it on that basis, but we do actually kind of run it on a silo basis through our departments, interest rate risk and a liquidity scenario, as far as the changes on that side of it, as well as a couple different credit risk scenarios where we have some pretty severe losses. And severity varies obviously between those two, one from a moderate one to a more severe. Regulatory compliance risks, mortgage banking issues that we may have, and then a final scenario in which we combine all those and run that as a combined scenario, and that's our really kind of base level severe adverse scenario as it relates to CCAR and DFAST. So we kind of run through that capacity.
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably one of the areas where we're different quite a bit is, as a large banking institution, the Fed really they publish some very severe scenarios that you have to run and forecast your capital actions and the impacts to your institution from a credit loss perspective, and how much capital demand you're going to have over various scenarios. And then the bank has to run and come up with its own scenarios. And the hard part about it is we can do all the modeling internal and figure this out for ourselves, and then the Fed will take our results and they'll put it in their models, and that's a black box, and you may have differences. So it's almost like a game of chicken when you think about the stress test. It all ties back with your capital planning, right? You want to, banks kick off a lot of excess capital that we want to ultimately return to our shareholders if we can't find the investment that'll produce an acceptable rate of return. So through the CCAR process, you really get one chance a year to set those distributions, whether that's an increase in your dividend or share repurchase. And you want to ask for so much where you can optimize your capital structure and get any you don't want trapped capital, right? You want to get as much of the excess out as you can, but you don't want to ask for too much where you're at risk of failing and get a black mark, right? So it's kind of a game of chicken. And there's been some recent movement or chatter in the regulatory space coming out of the Federal Reserve, then some of that may become a little bit easier. But your traditional capital budgeting that they kind of teach you in finance school has been thrown out the window. It's a constrained capital because you ultimately have to get the approval from your regulators to redeploy that capital. So you have to have good forecasts, you have to have good models, and you have to really understand all the risk and not ask for too much. And it'll be interesting. Next week is actually the CCAR results will get released, and that's always a very interesting time of year to see sort of who got approval to do what. And actually yesterday the DFAST results came out. They're a little bit less exciting because that doesn't have any sort of forward-looking capital actions in those results, and most banks generally do quite well in that scenario. It's the CCAR scenarios that that really set the tone for the rest of the year in terms of how you plan to manage your capital.
And we certainly use the results from those tests as a barometer for our comparisons too. Obviously, we operate at different levels of capacities and risks and overall dynamics of the overall balance sheet compared to large institutions like that. But we still use that, like I said, as a barometer. We're reading the studies and the results and what they say. We have an understanding about what those DFAST simulations kind of look like, what the Fed's kind of kicking out as expectations, and kind of. So we just want to make sure that we're in line. At the end of the day, all models are wrong. Some are useful. That's kind of the premise we continue to operate around. And then not only that, like I said, it can't just be an exercise. This whole capital planning process, it's got to be something that once you get through and you see results, whether you pass or don't pass it, you want your in our world, that combined stress scenario, we want it to be stressful. We want it to be painful. At the end of the day, it should show that we have enough capital. But if it doesn't, how can we remedy it? That's the whole exercise and process that it goes through. So it needs to be painful enough, and real enough too. So and that's kind of the measurement tool as far as the struggles that we kind of go through, and that's where we, like I said, the barometer capacity, where we compare ourselves to what the defense results dictate to kind of help.
Yeah, and I'll say this, the other thing about being useful, right? I think we're always trying to, there's a lot of regulation that we're subject to, they just have to do it. We try to take it, not take the approach where we have to do this, we have to do this. We always try to find, is there something that we can change in our DIU process to make ourselves better risk managers or better capital managers? And I think that the CCAR, that's one great thing that came out of the CCAR. It really forces capital management and the thought around stress and the thought around risk. It's across the organization. We have a couple hundred people that are probably involved in some capacity, and that's all the way from our business line to corporate treasury. Obviously, is really kind of one of the sort of the end users of that. But it really brings the whole organization together. It's painful. It's not a fun exercise, but it definitely is something I think that we found a lot of value in it outside of that process. So, and that's the goal, I guess. Whenever for any regulation, you want to make sure that it's relevant and that you can actually grow from it. That's why I think we found that there.
On the investing side, at least from my role perspective here, this is kind of multifaceted. Not only I don't actually invest the bank's investment portfolio, but I do have to have an understanding about what sort of bonds we are purchasing, so I can make sure that the model is actually managing those cash flows and structures properly within them. So I have to have an understanding about the behaviors and transactions of those itself. But the other side of the aspect is because the way we've actually chosen to operate at BNC National Bank is myself and our chief operating officer, who's my boss. We are involved. We're the ones that manage our client money on the wealth management side as well too. We kind of apply that whole, understanding your risk perspective and profile overall to that investment portfolio as well for each one of our individual clients. So I'm wearing multiple hats on a given day. It really comes down to time management and kind of getting.
Yeah, and I'd say from our perspective, it's a little bit. We have the wealth management division that'll do the investing in the clients, and we use our investment portfolio really to help manage all the top of the house risks, making sure that we have enough. It's really a source of liquidity. It helps offset or help you manage your interest rate risk position, and it's also a vehicle where you can get invest in assets and earn a return. If you have excess funding, you can always use it as an outlet to kind of earn a return on match up.
We've kind of been big as far as it relates to our ALCO committee and our bank board, and so from there on top up trying to go through. Now, you can't view the investment portfolio for the bank purely as a source of liquidity. Yes, it provides liquidity not only from a budget perspective, but also on a cash flow basis. But it also should be an earnings driver for the institution too. If you manage that portfolio properly, you can actually exceed expectations and outperform on that basis, and that can actually continue to drive earnings with reduced risk capacity as well too. So that's kind of our belief as far as it may differ across other institutions. That's probably why we have a larger bank portfolio than some institutions, because we have been able to drive earnings as a source that way too. Maybe when we don't have funding growth like we wanted or expected as well. Moving on from there, pricing or return hurdles. So my department, we set depository rates as it relates to our geographic markets. Currently, we kind of set those across the board, given the whole world that we live in, where everybody has capacity to the internet. It's kind of hard to price transactions. Price deposit different in Minneapolis or Bismarck or so on and so forth, when everybody has the ability to kind of see where you price. Back in the day, that we used to do that a little bit differently, but now I would say across the board, we generally kind of set depository pricing, but we're surveying institutions using a service called SNL. It basically provides a subscriber-based service that provides you access to all peer institutions that you see, and you can kind of make up your own markets as far as who you want to compare yourself to for pricing purposes. Get feedback from those managers as far as who they're dealing with pricing. Try to fight for public deposits or whatever it may be. Getting an idea of what pricing should be, and that's really kind of our role.
Yeah, I'd say similar. We're offering more guidance what we see in the bank. We may give guidance in terms of the pricing based on our overall need for assets or deposits, or what if we're looking for loan growth, maybe we need to be more aggressive in one area, or if there's an opportunity there. We don't set pricing per se, but we do that. A lot of guidance. Ultimately, the groups that do set pricing are going to be held accountable. When it comes to the asset liability committee meeting and the new business spreads are discussed, that's going to generate a lot of discussion. So we try to be a partner to our business lines that are setting the pricing, help them make sure they don't go too far out of bounds. But ultimately, they're going to be bound by the return hurdles that we set, and that we can control. And also, there's there are top rates in terms of deposit pricing that Treasury would set that the business lines really shouldn't exceed or wouldn't want to exceed for various economic reasons internally for them. But we're really just trying to keep pricing in sort of under our sphere of influence and really trying to be more of a partner, because we don't know the market. We're not close enough to them, but we know generally we have the benefit of visibility across all the different business lines. So we can say, hey, we're struggling for loan growth. Could you tweak your pricing a little bit? Could you help us generate that? It all comes back to what's in our forecast. What kind of net interest margin do we have in our forecast, and what can we do to help make sure we're hitting those targets?
And it really should be, as far as operationals go, as far as the way we handle funds transfer pricing too, since we're the ones providing the methodology and metrics for that too. Obviously, we should be the source for the one pricing relationships on some level. Regulatory, I kind of put that in there really because, like I said, we're hyper-regulated in the world we live in banking right now. It's kind of been that way for a while coming out of the Great Recession. Like I said, some of the things were good, some of the things were bad at the end of the day. And a lot of the things, now they didn't really apply to us, they're borderline. Now they definitely don't apply to us given the changes that they've recently made. But that said, we still need to stay abreast of what those changes are, because in some way, shape, or form, typically what happens is the larger banks ends up trickling down to us. We're better off being knowledgeable from the start about what those implications are for those institutions, so that we have an understanding about when a regulator comes in. Yeah, you're not subject to this, but what would you look like in this sort of scenario? Have you thought about this? Have you done that? We kind of prepare ourselves from in that environment and have to deal with the hyper-regulation world. We've got different, every acronym that you've ever heard of and never heard of before has been created coming out of Dodd-Frank. Right? It's been really interesting, but it's a lot of work to stay abreast of all of it.
Yeah, definitely. There's a regulation for everything, and I think as in our role in the corporate treasury at the bank, we're responsible for really getting into the weeds, understanding it, so that we can be knowledgeable, explain it in sort of layman's terms to our business lines to help them understand what's being asked of us, because sometimes it's often complicated and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense, but we have to react to that and help make sure the bank has a good path forward to deal with all the regulations that are coming through.
Others, I hate other, but it really is true. There's always ad hoc projects taking place, pricing, doing peer analysis, doing M&A, modeling up some M&A transactions, kind of seeing what deals are pricing at versus comparison, what you may be attracted at as a seller or as a buyer. Anywhere from, I'm involved with numerous committees, 401k investment committee, mortgage hedging committee, so I'll go obviously in many other facets within the bank as well too. So there's always other ad hoc projects that I always seem to come up.
Yeah, I find myself getting pulled in on a lot of ad hoc projects as well, sort of like a consultant to our business line, just helping them navigate through things, thinking how does, the common question is about how would Treasury think about this, what is Treasury's opinion? So we get pulled in a lot of those things, and there's no shortage of work to do, that's for sure. So.
Opportunities and challenges, again, I don't really see the point in us going bullet point by bullet point. I guess a lot of these things kind of speak for themselves. I think we've pretty much laid out the reality that we're kind of involved in a lot of different things within our institution. Diversity, I put that in. I think we feel that's an opportunity. One of the things why we really love what we do and why we love where we work is because we have those capacities and opportunities to touch so many different things. I can show up one day with the idea and intent that I'm going to do this and end up not even touching it for 3 more days. That is also a challenge, obviously. It's a risk and it's something that can be a struggle to deal with. You're always getting pulled in one direction. Right when you think you can get back to what you're working on, something else comes up. But development opportunity strategy, visibility, engagement. Given the fact that we're a small institution, as far as where I office, I think it's something like over 2/3 of our C-suite operations is offices right next to me. So I'm constantly getting pulled into meetings. I'm always involved in conversations that are taking place, and I'm always helping out with different tasks that just come up from their ideas and thoughts and things that they want to see. So that's kind of a fun aspect for me. Data integration. Some of the challenges banks have so much information. I mean, we've got details down to itty-bitty little information about every customer as far as transaction details, as far as characteristics of their own financial profiles and so on and so forth. We've got so much information, the capacities, that if banks can find a way to identify who their core customers are, only going to drive franchise value even more. So it's kind of trying to take data information from one set of source from another source and kind of getting them melded together to understand. At the end of the day, you want to understand who that core customer is and who isn't your core customer, so you can price transactions up more appropriately. And at the end of the day, really give the benefit to those core customers that really matter. Technology, again, that's not only just on a fintech basis, but that's just the evolution of the world. We're in hyper-regulation. It used to be back in the day when you were running an interest rate risk model, at the end of the day you ran it, it was an exercise. You gave it to regulators, checked the box, it was done. Now you actually, what do you do with this? What does this mean? You have to understand the capacities, what it's telling you, and use it as a strategy source, and that's a good thing. But it's definitely a challenge to deal with. Regulation, as we've talked about, resources and time, again, kind of what I touched on before. Control, I guess control on there more on the basis of funds transfer pricing. When I talked over methodology and educational resource, at the end of the day, we see the net effect of branches P&Ls, but we don't actually see. We kind of lose sight of what the transactions are after they're. So if we can give somebody direction and concept as far as this transaction makes sense or makes sense priced a little bit differently. We don't. At the end of the day, then once it we don't actually touch it. And then growth and path. Prior to my employment, coming out of college, my boss worked by himself. My role is currently, we're a 3-person team. The 3rd person is an intern. We've had other interns work through, but we are a very small department. We operate within. We've been successful doing it, but definitely resources and time and growth opportunities. There's no set path. Basically, my titles, as they move through my career, have been kind of just made up as they come. But they definitely relate to what I do. There's definitely no hidden, here's my next path and step.
Yeah, great. I would echo everything you said. I think on the opportunity side, it's great to be, if you like banking and are banking like me, being in the corporate treasury division and getting to see how and interact with all the business lines, see how they operate. I think that's the most fascinating part of my job, the visibility into the strategy that drives the bank in terms of the challenges, definitely the data, the technology, and how regulation is really forcing you to get be more data-driven and show the data. As regulators collect more data, then they're able to scrutinize you even further, so that becomes a challenge. And then to your point on finding your core customer, I agree that that's critical. Any bank that can track that is going to be very successful moving forward, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources to figure out who is our core customer and how can we build a bank around it. That's an ongoing process, and how we'll ever really find it, because there's just so much data out there to try to say.
Just bullet points here as far as skills required, and more of a belief in kind of the things that we feel are necessary in order to be successful in our position. Analytical, obviously, I think that would go without saying, in the finance role, especially in banking, with statistics, any sort of analytical roles, like doing data regression analysis, understanding betas, understanding what the risk profile of certain bond munis and certain things that you purchase with your investment portfolio, loan transactions, deposit fundings, that sort of thing. Communication diligence, again, like a lot of these things kind of speak for themselves, and I think you guys can understand about where they come from. Being able to, in our role as with a small institution like we have, accountability, obviously, you have to be accepting of it and you have to want it. Giving that said, it has a good side, obviously, having your opportunity to be visible, to be nimble, to be able to change from one position, and working with one task, to drop that, move on to another one. Risk discipline, I think that's a really good bullet point, and it kind of prioritizes what we do. It speaks to, at the end of the day, that's what ALM is about. It's about managing risk, understanding what your risk metrics and profiles look like, but willing to accept some risk because you can't mitigate it all. You want to limit it to the capacities you can, but also earn as much money as you can in that situation as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think definitely the analytical side is paramount, being able to use technology to your advantage in terms of data mining, and then what do you do with it? How do you present that? So the communication piece of it, I think we're just naturally sort of numbers people, and so how do you put that into a presentation where someone who's not a numbers person can make sense of it, and an executive who does that a lot of time, hasn't had the benefit of burying themselves in the detail can actually use it. Definitely ethics and is a huge part of it. Not just banking, obviously, but any professional career. The highest ethical standards, but also very strong work ethic. The nimble part and accountability, I think you've got to be able to adapt. The world has changed in my 15 years in a corporate setting, and the world's changed multiple times, and it's going to keep changing, and it's changing at a pretty fast clip. So you got to be able to adapt to that. You got to know how to apply what you've learned on one project to another. I think you just said I have the ability to think outside the box a lot of times, and then to your point on risk discipline, I think that defines what these roles are. You don't want to find yourself, if you're not disciplined, you're going to get yourself into trouble. I mean, you have to be able to understand the risk, put limits around it, and then manage within those limits, and there being times when that discipline gets challenged, and you just have to have the resolve to stick with it. So,
I think with that, we'll open up to any sort of questions anybody might have.
Yeah, hey, so banks have been relatively asset sensitive, right, the past few years, but they've been monetizing that. It's kind of switched about 18 months ago or so. So I'm just curious about where do you see that going, and thoughts on that?
I have the viewpoint that we're going to continue to see liability sensitive. We're going to see more liability sensitive institutions come out. So you're dealing with a world where banks have been the beneficiary of long-term low rates.
Right.
And as those rates continue to rise, we're going to have to reset those deposit yields. Again, when we talked about before, the definition of defining who your core customer is. Well, those you don't want to. Everybody's trying to define who their core customers and who those rate-sensitive customers are. Well, the reality is, at the end of the day, you're going to have to reprice your liabilities more than likely faster than your assets. That's going to be the unfortunate nature of the world we're living in. We've gone up further on the curve, but there's a little slope up there for the most most part on the asset side of it. So there's really a lot more risk on the front end of the balance sheet as it relates to a change in rates, and we're going to have to start, banks have really lagged raising deposit rates as an industry, and now you can start to see that edge up as the Fed continues to raise short-term rates. That's good. That's a vital risk for us, and I think you're going to continue to see that, especially with the long end of the curve staying short or staying low. It's going to be a struggle. The margins have compressed. I mean, there's hardly any spread out there on any asset you can find without taking a ton of risk in that asset. Even if you are, even those high risk assets, there's still very little spread involved in those two. So I think you're going to see a lot more liability sensitive institutions, and that's going to be more played out.
Yeah, I think we're still in an environment where we're trying to figure out what are your betas on your deposits. You're coming out of an ultra low rate environment. Throw your models out the window because I don't think they apply right now, and it's going to be a feeling out period before we really know what's going on.
Yeah, and it's all those models were built off a point in time that was like 10, 15 years ago. I mean, we haven't had a rising rate environment for so long. What would happen before doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen again. And I think that's where the risk lies, is try to build in sensitivity around those betas, having an understanding that, yes, maybe before your betas were 60 basis points, but now they're going to be 7 or 80. And that's the reality that you live in. You kind of got to measure that sensitivity in that way and have an understanding that your deposits are going to reprice, and maybe they're going to reprice at a far more higher clip than they used to.
What do you guys see as a terminal beta for deposits? Is it 75, 80%?
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say that across the industry. I can say for us, I would say it's pretty high. That's a little bit high.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd be seeing 75 beta. That's pretty high overall. Our studies don't show anywhere near that. That said, there's still, given your deposit base and the size of your institution, a 10 basis point change in that beta is going to be pretty significant, meaningful impact on your earnings. So I don't see it at 75.
Give me a number, come on. 60?
Yeah, probably more like 60.
Okay.
I'm not close enough to it on that side of the business, so unfortunately I'm not going to give you a number.
Yeah, I would say closer to 60 than 75.
Okay.
I have a question, like how do small banks compete with large banks?
Well, good question. That it's tough. It really is, especially in today's world. For the most part, when you define small, I mean that's the biggest subjective term there. I don't know what there's been so much consolidation in the industry that there's far fewer $100 million banks, but there's still a ton of them. They still exist. They still serve a purpose for the communities that they're in. And that's probably still a good thing and an okay thing for some of them. Some of them probably don't, and consolidation is going to continue, and we're going to see that. You're going to see, I think what you're going to see, those large institutions are still continuing to get bigger. So it's been a fight, it's been a struggle. Competition, like I said, has been the primary driver about why spreads are so tight right now. We're bidding on loan deals that we would prefer not to, but we got to stay competitive. We got to serve our customers, and we got to be there at least to try. And it's definitely been a struggle. I think we're, again, trying to identify those core customers is your main tool. Taking that information from all your source data and integrating it together to the capacities where you can define, which sort of, how many of your customers have direct deposit? What are their age demographics? Doing a study about, does this customer have multiple accounts with us? Do they have savings, DDA? Do they have loan? Do they have home equity loan? Do they have an auto loan? That sort of thing. Can we mull together? Because those would, in theory, define who a more core customer is versus somebody who just comes in and opens up a CD. So a bank's ability to define who those core customers are, you have to be okay to, stand pat as far as growth expectations are in a world like this where you're not really picking up a lot of margins.
I would actually turn the question on how do big banks compete with small and local banks, because we don't have the advantage all the time of being on the ground, knowing the customers as well as the local banks. So that can be a challenge, and that type of intelligence, on the ground intelligence, might lead you to say, I'm okay me take a little bit more risk in the structure because I know this person and I know their intent, whereas a larger bank is probably building it to fit in a box, and that doesn't always work. As much as we try to be as local, you still have to manage the level of customization you have in your underwriting policies and whatnot. So I think it's a challenge on both sides of that coin.
The evolution of banking is going to be really interesting. It has been so far, and it's going to continue this way. As there's a lot of people that have the extremist views that banks are going to die. Are all going to go away because everybody's going to be working over the internet or through iPads or things like that. You're going to do everything through FaceTime and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I don't believe that. Yes, banking probably will change, hopefully for the better, but I don't see banking going away. I'm still seeing small institutions like us that serve those small to middle market niche businesses providing benefits for those customers, especially for us. Honestly, I think one of our benefits is our location, our geographic location. We're in that hardy upper Midwest. We've got solid, long-standing relationships. We've been around. We've been through the Great Recession with a lot of these customers. We continue to help them. We didn't foreclose. We helped get through the situation in difficult times like that. We're a larger institution. You're just a number, an account number. And that's kind of the way we have to do it on a service basis. And that's something we kind of strive for at BNC, and we have to continue to stick to. We got to stick to who we are.
One question was I see you in the marketing last year. Some relief from the government. What conditions? I don't know exactly, but does it help bigger bank or especially mid bank a little better and then big bank as well? But what is it? Where does the benefit come from that system? Is it truly because you ship more resources on true business generation? Or because of the it's actually generating new type of business?
Yeah, I'll go first if you don't mind. The amount of resources to comply with all the complexities of Dodd-Frank and I don't even know all of them, to be honest with you. It's a tremendous amount of resources, so I think to the extent that the regulators can rationalize some of those, look, I think everybody agrees that there was more regulation was needed and is not necessarily a bad thing, but it has to be the right regulation, the smart regulation. I think Dodd-Frank maybe went a couple of steps further, and some of the regulations were so restrictive that and overlapped under the weight of itself. You had contradictions within that rule that became very hard to navigate. So if you can streamline that and get the resources dedicated to managing the good pieces of the regulation, not have to waste time on the confusing part. I think that's the bigger benefit for. I don't know that what was removed is it's not a big game changer, right? There's still a lot there, but definitely the clarity and cleaning up some of that confusion is beneficial for all banks, particularly some of the bigger banks that are subject to some of the more aggressive regulations that are done.
Yeah, and I agree with Corey. I think that's probably more beneficial in that aspect. It made it simpler for the typical day-to-day operation person on our side of the institution to have a little bit more understanding about Dodd-Frank. At the end of the day, so regulatory costs internally become very, very expensive. Maybe that dials back a little bit for the institution on our side, but I think the real benefit comes from kind of that between him and us size institution, because it forces those institutions to continue to grow, acquire organically, grow, or through acquisition. They can continue to grow and still have ways before they get into that top threshold of being a city.
Yeah, definitely. So for the beneficiaries are the banks that have less than $250 billion in assets or greater than 50 because they were subject to all the stress tests and the regulations. So I think you would start to see sort of the cliff effects of that. Institutions that were bumping up against that $50 billion limit. Well, I don't want to get bigger because that's a whole new world of regulatory pain. And or if you're going to do it, you just gotta burst through that barrier. There's no tiptoeing in there because that you'd end up in a probably worse economic spot if you were at 51 billion assets versus 49 billion. So you would even we've seen institutions that just said we're going to put a hard cap on our assets and not go above that. And I think some of that has gone away, and rightly so. It doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to do the stress testing and stuff, but certainly a lot of the unnecessary scrutiny goes away. Now, for the biggest banks, real big banks, the SIFIs, they're not getting much relief at all. I think the regulators still have them squarely in their focus. The U.S. Bank, we fall somewhere between sort of the old SIFI, the 50 billion, and we're not a SIFI, which is a good thing, but we're definitely we still are subject to a lot of the more intense regulations, and rightly so, because we're a bigger bank, we're a more complicated institution, so I think that's appropriate, but not excessive.
Anybody else?
One more question about, so the big bank, small bank thing, that's a great question. So on the asset side, I can see where they can compete, right? The small banks can compete. But what about the deposit side, the funding side? Is your deposit base, it's got to be small business based, right?
Yeah. I mean, not entirely. I mean, obviously, we still have retail operations. We still have that core relationship with our retail-based customers as well, too. And primarily, yes, we are business-based. With that, again, because we're a relationship-based model, we have most of our deposits, they don't just have a deposit relationship with us, they're a loan relationship, too. So we leverage that relationship. And basically, a lot of times, again, one of the benefits of our location is we're true to that customer. We've been through thick and thin with a lot of them. They stick around. They have that hearty Midwestern belief in people, and that's kind of been a beneficiary for that as our institutions go. We're seeing some crazy things, honestly, on the pricing side, especially on deposits. You're seeing a lot of institutions, competitors, especially in Western North Dakota, where we primarily are. You're starting to see some banks come in there and price pretty crazy transactions. Some deposit rates are getting uneconomical, and it's interesting. And that's kind of the struggle we're dealing with. But that helps define who your core customer isn't, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to be willing to give up some relationships that you may have had. If they're just going to be a rate chaser and go out there and go somewhere because somebody's willing to pay 5% on a 2-year CD. I mean, sorry, in this day and age, we can't make anything on that. We got to let that go.
What about earnings credit rate? I mean, U.S. Bank, right? So that's, I imagine, a big part of your interest rate risk. It's kind of an off, below the line sort of number, right? But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I know there's a risk that as that increases, right? People don't have to hold as much balance, right, to get the same credit rate back.
Right, and you got to be your earnings credit rate just in the same context as you do an interest rate. And to the extent that, so for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, so earnings credit rate is, in lieu of paying interest on a deposit, you can use that credit to offset treasury management fees or something like that, right? So it's a monetization of balances that until recently you really couldn't actually pay interest on by law. So as interest rates move up, obviously there's a lot of pressure on the earnings credit rate, and you're concerned about how well, if you're going to lose some of those excess balance, or at least disintermediate them into a higher, more expensive product. They're going to move your customers are going to let that excess capacity remain on tap. So hopefully you can sell more treasury management fees and compensate that, and at least make a margin, or else you got to be prepared that those excess balances are going to move to hopefully to a different part of your balance sheet, or perhaps even out of your banking system. So it's something we watch very closely. We're in constant contact with our treasury management teams that actually do the product pricing and some of that stuff.
So there's this trend about online banking where you're competing with Goldman and Ally Bank and those online banks where you have no access to retail. So basically, if you want to make a deposit, you probably need to buy some sort of way to just send your money electronically, right? How do you see the future of those institutions, and how do you compete with them? And also, who's giving that beautiful CD that you just spoke about?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see platforms like markets pop up, and there's definitely economics to be had there. And I think it's a trade-off between, what do you get? You get someone who you don't know, you don't have that connection to in that relationship, and you're basically buying them, right, with a higher rate. That works for some, but there's always going to be a set of customers that want that relationship, that value the full services that the bank can offer, and they want to, frankly, want to be able to go into a branch if they need to and talk to someone, and that's going to be the differentiator, I think. Internet banks are nothing new. They've been around since internet's been invented, and banks have competed against it with varying degrees of success, but you have to watch it, right, because they do pay a much higher rate of interest, and at some point it becomes attractive, and that's when you really got to start thinking about your deposit prices, your retail deposit pricing. So I think that's one thing we tend to watch now, is where the funds starting to flow into those vehicles, and is it time then to react and be a bit more defensive with your rate that you pay.
And I would think that the millennials will change that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a primary source.
I still like to be able to go in and talk to somebody.
Exactly.
So I'm a US Bank customer.
Yeah.
And I have my whole network that is right online. Right. My
Yeah.
kids are there.
Yeah.
So I like that, but my kids who, God, they avoid anybody like this, right?
I agree with you. But I think at the end of the day, what you're going to end up getting, and those are algorithm-based models. Everybody gets pigeonholed into a certain character. If you're not that person, though, you're going to get prices if you were. So you may be able to get a better transaction by going into a smaller institution or somebody else and actually seeing a customer and having them, not just dealing with SoFi, but just literally take 5 minutes online and they'll turn around and tell you how much of a line you can have, how much your rate is. And that can be great for some aspects and some people. But when you have solid credit, or you have a good history, or you have a unique story, you can't tell that through an application process. You actually have to go into a customer and go into a bank and have that relationship. And I think that's really what we're going to have to leverage. Now, maybe that relationship, we come to you instead of you coming to us. Maybe that's where it evolves to. I imagine there's probably some both. But it's definitely going to be changing at overall geographic footprint of banking. These large, true core traditional banking sense buildings probably going to get minimized or go away to some degree, and that's probably an okay thing too. I would imagine that most banks would be happy not carrying the burden of that asset on their balance sheet too. So.
Yeah, and I think from a technology perspective, we do have to be sensitive, and it's not like banks are not investing. I think there's been a lot of investment in technology and a lot of recognition that is the way to the future. If you think about millennials and using Venmo, for example, to move money around, what did banks do? They banded together. We created a product called Zelle. I think it's already this year done more payments volume than Venmo did last year. And you give it away for free, and now you integrate that with your app and your online banking, and you compete with technology in different ways. And I think technology will become a bigger part of banking. And I agree with Greg that the branches will probably be rationalized a little bit more. You may move to a model where you have fewer tellers and more smart ATMs with a video person that you can consult with if you have a problem. But I don't see technology replacing banking. I think the banks have the resources to compete, and we partner with fintech too. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to kind of embrace and compete on our own merits.
And with that, I have to call time. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here.